If you've ever opened a puzzle and wondered who built it before you, or held a piece and felt the weight of history in your hands, then this podcast is for you. Hey, I'm Lucy, and welcome to Dissectologists. Today I'm talking with Carolyn, a vintage puzzle collector who brings old puzzles back into the light. Her collection spans decades of puzzle design, artwork, craftsmanship, and culture. So I'm pretty excited to dig into how these puzzles found you, Carolyn, and what stories they've carried through time. So thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here.
So do you remember the very first vintage puzzle that kind of made you think, oh, okay, this is different?
Yes, absolutely. So, I was a modern puzzler and I really loved to do sets. So I had done all the modern Beatles puzzles I could find. And then I started looking into, more Beatles puzzles, and I started searching. My first vintage puzzle, in fact, was a Beatles puzzle. It's from the late 60s, maybe early 70s. And I knew then when I did that puzzle, wow, like this puzzle has been here since I was born almost. And what a life it must have had before me. And then in doing the puzzle, I started thinking about, wow, what was going on in the 60s? Who would have been doing this puzzle in the 60s? And that's when vintage puzzling really took on a life. When you do vintage, you're not only getting the puzzle, you're getting the quality, and then you're also getting the story. And you don't know, you can only speculate what that story is.
Yeah.
Most of the time, which I think is very interesting.
I guess unless you're like a historian and
Yeah.
like how would you even trace that back?
Exactly.
So what first drew you to puzzles?
It was the picture. I was very much inspired by just whatever the image was. And that's, I think, where a lot of people start. And then it quickly morphs into, something else grabs you, and that's what really keeps you there. So in doing that, I've always been kind of like a sets person. So like I told you, I did the Beatles puzzle, I did 2, then I did 3. And I think that's what took me down the road to, vintage. Even in vintage puzzling, I do sets. I don't do one from one company, a vintage company. I have to do at least 3 before I feel like know the company or I know the whatever it is that I'm doing.
I like that approach, actually, to kind of give everyone a little, space, because one puzzle from that same company might be just a little bit different than the next, and the way they do the cuts and, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you could just get an outlier, and then kind of judge based on that. Whereas, if you do at least 3, then you have a good idea of what a company is about in vintage. And there's so many awesome vintage companies that we're producing. I have puzzles ranging from cardboard puzzles from the 30s on up to around the 1980s and 90s. But my sweet spot is the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
So for me, that's most of my collection.
So you mentioned the Beatles puzzle was kind of the one that started the whole, rabbit hole for you.
Yeah.
Do you remember, let's say like that post-Beatles puzzle, your first find, like a puzzle that was, maybe you were searching for it, it's very special. What was that like?
Well, the very first time I did a vintage Springbok puzzle, I had heard about Springbok and I did one. The quality was so amazing. So then I started seeking it out. And the first one that I sought out that I bought was Kachina #1. And I'm telling you, that puzzle, I bought it. It was new in the shrink. It was super inexpensive, comparatively speaking, to today. And I tore that shrink off. I did that puzzle and I had no idea what I was doing. I knew it was vintage. I knew it was old. I really didn't think about the significance of this puzzle that has made it 50 or plus years and, still in the shrink wrap.
Incredible.
And so, yeah, I de-shrinked it. And later I found out, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should have tried to find one that was open.
When you were building that puzzle, which, in my mind, I'm thinking it must have been fragile on some level. Like, did it make you kind of nervous or?
Not at all. I did not know then what I know today. So no, not at all.
And now you're just like, oh, what was I thinking?
Yeah. So I did always like to, look for vintage puzzles in the shrink, what it would have been like in the manufacturing process, like, quality, how it would have originally been. But then, after I did that one, then I started buying open puzzles. I would have to have a shrink puzzle. And then I needed to buy an open one so that I could actually do the puzzle. And then in time, I kind of morphed into not keeping the shrink puzzles so much and really going for more of the open ones because I like to do the puzzle. I don't just want my puzzle to be sitting on the shelf and not able to touch it, not able to do it and enjoy it. So I started looking for puzzles that are open. And every now and then I'll buy one that's in the shrink wrap if it's one of my favorites, just so I have a backup, because you have to have a backup for all of your favorites, right?
Especially as a collector, I'm sure. What if a piece goes missing?
And a vintage puzzle that you can't easily find.
Have you ever found something that was unexpectedly rare and valuable?
I'm going to say no. I have friends that have, but not myself. Because for me, my puzzling journey starts with the hunt. I research and kind of know what I'm looking for, and I might find something along the way that I'm surprised by and that it's just a really cool puzzle, but not anything unexpectedly so rare.
What do vintage puzzles have that modern puzzles don't? Like, maybe are there differences you notice in material, cut, how the box is designed, that kind of stuff?
Yes, you can kind of tell a little bit about a puzzle by the wear, maybe how it's been stored, how it's been handled. As far as the new puzzles, though, I think that the material that's used today is usually environmentally friendly. So there's definitely a difference in material, which does lead to sometimes a difference in durability. Some of the newer modern puzzles, I can't imagine still being here 70 years, 80 years from now. I think my oldest puzzle is from 1930, and I recently did one that was 85 years old.
Oh,
And it's still in beautiful, immaculate condition. And it's not super thick, but the material is rigid and it's very strong and it's very sturdy. The other thing is like the images, the puzzles back then, I think the art was so exceptional.
have you noticed clear shifts in artwork themes over these decades?
Yes, very much so. I love the actual art that was commissioned to make puzzles. And then I have a lot of puzzles from like the 80s in which, I might have several that are made of like hamburgers.
Love it.
It amazes me. And this is the thing that intrigues me about vintage puzzles. I love to see across puzzles how many vintage companies did the same or similar subjects. There's much crossover in art. I can't tell you how many vintage companies made puzzles of penguins.
Really?
How many vintage, yeah, and that's interesting to me,
It is.
because it kind of lets you know like what people's tastes were back then. And then, the hamburgers, the French fries, chocolate, ice cream. I just think that's really interesting to me that I get a kick out of it all the time. I love all of that.
There are a lot of food puzzles out there. I guess maybe that's like a whole sect
Yeah.
of puzzle when it comes to imagery, but
And if you see, like now you're starting to see more modern companies starting to go back to making more food themed puzzles, candy,
love those.
desserts. I guess it's just one of my taste things that I really enjoy.
Food and fancy art. There's nothing wrong. I'm not going to knock it. I love it.
Food and fancy art, it just goes together. I don't know. Something about it has a nice ring to it.
So, have you ever opened a vintage puzzle and found something inside, like a note, a missing piece explanation written on the box, a newspaper clipping, anything bizarre like that?
I have opened puzzles with extra pieces that don't belong to the puzzle. I did one vintage puzzle where I thought it was one puzzle and it was a completely different puzzle in the box,
Oh, no.
which was interesting. I've had some very vintage, like 1950s puzzle that was in the shrink wrap still. All these years, open it up, and the pieces were disintegrated.
Oh,
I found change. I found little notes inside vintage puzzles, where they'll write on the box like the years and the dates that the puzzle was built and how long it took them.
oh, that's awesome.
Of course, you always get vintage puzzle boxes or with names on the inside, and you wonder, wow, who was that person? I haven't researched who the actual people are yet. Maybe I should Google and see what I can find on that. That might be an interesting thing to do.
Like puzzle genealogy.
Yeah. I think it'd be so cool if, I don't know, all the puzzles that are modern today will one day be vintage if they make it long enough, right? So it'd be so cool if on the inside of all the boxes they had like the old library style cards like you used to do when you were in elementary school. You'd have to find the card. It was stuck to the inside of the book.
Oh, yeah.
It'd be so cool if they had that in puzzles where, that was the commonplace that people would sign and date and kept a log. Because, the puzzles that I have on my shelves, I can only speculate where they've been. They've been on many tables, through many hands in many different homes all over the country at some point, and some from other countries, so you have no idea.
That's why that card system is really a great idea.
Yeah.
I've only run across that from one puzzle I mean,
Yeah.
haven't been puzzling as long as some people. And so maybe there's another company out there that does that. And I'd love to know who they are, but they're called Magic Puzzles.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a newer puzzle, but inside of it is a card
I love that.
that you write who did the puzzle on what date. At least some other people I think are thinking in this direction. And I think it's really cool.
I really love that, It'd be so nice too if it had like a little sticker where you could, if the people that choose to could stick it on the inside of the box, and that way it doesn't get lost or misplaced. And that way it stays with the puzzle over time.
Is there a particular puzzle that carries an especially powerful or emotional story for you?
Well, I think the one that for me that I always think about is actually not vintage, but it's a puzzle that when all my family was coming in town, my dad, my mom, who were elderly at the time, my brother, who's 14 years my senior, his adult children, and their children. So all these generations came in, and we had like a family get together, and they all stayed for a week. And I bought a puzzle, and I just put it on the dining table. I didn't have a puzzle set up like I do now. And, I just put it there so we would have something to do in case we didn't have something to talk about or people were getting bored or whatever. And it amazed me. The whole entire family at different times throughout the entire week sat around the puzzle. It's the only time that, the children would have been sitting with their grandparents and chit-chatting, talking over a puzzle. Different times it might have been both my parents sitting there. It could have been my brother and my parents, or the grandkids and me and my brother. And, it was just a place where we would collect different times, different people working on it. And by the end of the week, the puzzle was complete. It was a map puzzle. I had it very nicely framed, matted and everything. On the back of the puzzle, I put everyone's name who worked on the puzzle, which was everyone. And it's the last time we were all together. So it was very special to me, and it hung in my dining area until of course, I live in the South on the coast. So we had a hurricane, and, then the puzzle was destroyed. And people have said since then, well, did you think about getting another one and like doing it again so you would have it, and at the end of the day, it wasn't the puzzle. And so for me to do the puzzle again would feel very empty. It was actually the fact that it brought all of us together. We all touched the pieces. We all did it together. So I haven't done the puzzle again. I don't think I would do it again. I don't think it would be the same.
I understand that. There are just certain moments in life that you cannot replicate.
Yeah. And, puzzles actually bring people together. Look at the puzzling community of today,
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, people did puzzles and it wasn't a big deal. Nowadays, we do puzzles, and within a matter of minutes, I mean, if you're like me, I post them everywhere, anywhere that will let me. So everyone can see the puzzles in their glory, and how beautiful and special they are. So I think the way we do puzzles have changed a lot. And we have a huge puzzling community, and there's something in puzzling for everyone, no matter what your taste. You could interview 1,000 puzzlers and you would get 1,000 different variations. No two pieces alike.
I'm finding that very quickly through my conversations with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's dig into community, because it's one of my favorite conversations to have.
Yeah, I love it.
Have you connected with other collectors? And
yes,
is there a sense of community around this very specific niche within jigsaw puzzles?
I think that more people are going to vintage because, number one, they crave more. After you've done all the puzzles you can do, then what else is there, right? So they go looking and searching for whatever they're into, and then they end up in vintage. I have made so many friends through the puzzle community, but primarily through the vintage puzzle community. There's a huge group of people all over the country that collect, that are interested in preservation. I've been able to meet up with a lot of them. We congregate in Facebook groups. We go visit one another. I've flown across the country to visit other collectors and see their collections. Another thing, which I think has been very surprising to me in vintage puzzles, is that I actually have had people reach out to me and say, hey, I saw your video or I saw your post and you had this old puzzle. And, that puzzle was one that I did with my grandmother all the time when I was a kid. And my grandmother's since passed. And are you interested in letting it go? Because I'm really looking for it. And, I always let it go because at the end of the day, it's part of my collection. But to somebody else, it's so much more. It's called spreading the puzzle love.
Puzzle love.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay. There does seem to be just a great group of people attracted to jigsaw puzzling.
Yeah.
Call it brain chemistry. I don't know what it is, but so when someone sees your collection, whether it is in photos or it's in person, what do you hope that they feel?
Well, my kids would tell you that it feels really heavy in here because there's just too much stuff. For me, it's my happy place. It's like my quiet place. It's my protected space, because I am a collector that I keep all of my collection is limited to one room. So I think when people come in, especially if it's my collector friends, they probably come in and think, wow, your collection's kind of small, I mean, I have a lot of puzzles. I do. I have a really nice collection, but they're confined to one room. But I have friends that have thousands
Whoa.
of puzzles.
Where do you even keep them? At like a warehouse?
Yes. I'm a small fish in a big pond, know?
Yeah. I better not let my husband hear this episode because I don't want him getting any ideas because I just kind of keep puzzles all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I used to do the same, but then when I finally got into collecting and I realized I just wanted a dedicated space. And to me, it makes it very easy if you get to the end of a puzzle and realize you're missing one, it's in this room. Okay. It didn't go anywhere else. It's here.
So, Carolyn, I end every interview with the same 3 puzzle questions. And there's no right answers here, but I think people have like a strong opinion either way on most of these. So, what is your favorite puzzle size by piece count?
Mine is 500 piece. And most of the vintage puzzles that I find are going to be 500 piece. It's hard to find a vintage that's complete and in really good condition that's much larger than that. And I don't know really how many they made much larger than that back then. I know they did come out with 1,000 pieces at some point, but again, it's going to be a lot harder to find those in good condition and complete.
Did not know that about vintage puzzles. Thank you. See, learning all the time. You're finishing a puzzle and you realize that a piece is missing, which I guess happens with vintage. What do you do?
Well, the first thing I do is I get I get my big flashlight and I get on my hands and knees in my puzzle room and I start searching. Because when I buy vintage puzzles, I'm really a stickler about buying. I don't buy puzzles that there's not a picture of the completed puzzle. With a lot of the vintage puzzles, people say, oh, I counted it. It had 500 pieces. Well, a lot of the vintage companies, they weren't complete with 500 pieces. They had 506, 504, 499, so you can't really go based on count. So I really will only buy puzzles that I see completed in the ad or that's selling. So I'm pretty assured that they're complete when I get them, but I will literally search and search and search for that piece. And then if I don't find it, I will think about that piece for a very long time. Always. It's really bad.
That is so relatable. It's funny. Because I think a lot of people listening to this are going to get that on a level,
And, there are people that really don't mind missing pieces. And it bothers me a lot.
Oh, man. That's how I feel about it too. It really drives me crazy. And
It does.
some people are like, oh, like whatever, like I swap a lot and like it happens all the time and it's a bummer, but you just move on. And I'm like, but I didn't complete it, like, no, I'm putting it away unfinished.
How do you move on from that? But, yeah.
I have to get those out of my collection when I swap them and find them.
Yeah, it irks me.
Okay, my third question. So you open a new puzzle and some pieces are stuck together. Do you leave them stuck together or do you pull them apart and mix them in?
I absolutely leave them stuck together. And I'll tell you why. I have a real good reason for this. In the vintage puzzles, sometimes, when you get puzzles like that, they're not completely stamped through. And when you pull them apart, you risk damaging the pieces. So I'm not going to separate those. In the other case, if I'm getting a used puzzle, it's been done before, and some of the pieces are together. If it's not too many, I leave them together. And the reason I do that is because I consider it to be a gift from the universe, a head start, whatever.
It's interesting that you term that as a gift because I talked to a speed puzzler who said, we call those gifts.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is a gift, and I move on.
Oh, man. Well, this has been fun. Carolyn, thank you so much for spending time with me today and honestly for preserving these little pieces of history.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad, and I appreciate you letting me come on and, talk about what I am so passionate about and what I love.
And to everyone listening, whether your puzzles are fresh off the press or 100 years old, when you're puzzling, you're doing it the right way.